Good afternoon, it's 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column Live from our studio in Plymouth, England. Your host today, Brian Gerrish, and with me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we've got a pretty packed news programme today. There is so much happening out there, and we are fascinated at the number of calls and emails and texts we're getting from members of the public who are reporting strange things happening and saying to us what is going on in this country. So as always, we're going to be attempting to explain just what is happening behind the scenes. As always, a quick report on the weather. It's been exceptionally cold in Plymouth over the weekend. We have had some snow on Dartmouth, but most of the lower ground has stayed free of snow, but temperatures down to -4.5 on Dartmouth last night. So we hope those of you who've suffered from the snow are doing okay. Children are enjoying themselves, so maybe there's a bit of a silver lining, but more cold weather on the way. Okay, well, we're going to lead off on the subject of immigration. This is an extremely important topic, and it's quite clear to us that the government is basically carrying out about a massive propaganda exercise on this topic, which we're going to delve into a bit.
Right, so first of all, this is from yesterday. The Mail saying, "Mother who dared to tell the truth about immigration" on the BBC, and highlighting this lady who stood up on BBC Question Time. She had some pretty strong things to say. She's from Boston, which is Lincolnshire, is it? I think so.
Right, yeah.
Boston is at breaking point, she said. All the locals can't cope anymore. You go down to Boston High Street and it's just like you're in a foreign country. It's got to stop. The services are at breaking point. And as if that wasn't enough to enrage people, they came straight along with another article. "There's no chance we're leaving. Lithuanian single mother buys designer clothes and enjoys lavish holidays with more than £1,000 a month in UK benefits." And this is Natalia Belova, 33, and she likes to buy clothes in Roberto Cavalli and Armani Exchange. And she gets all kinds of handouts, and despite her comfortable life, she thinks the government should pay for private nannies. So two articles in one day, basically attempting to enrage people over immigration. It wasn't just the Daily Mail, it was the Sun as well, and the Express as well. Here's the Sun article, basically saying, immigrant on £14,000 a year benefits refuses full-time job. A migrant mum thanked the UK yesterday for letting her claim £14,500 a year in benefits. But unfortunately, it's not as simple as it seems, because Politics UK website found out that this lady, in fact, has been in the country for a number of years and would like to be a professional actress, and she's appeared in one advertisement in 2003. In 2011, according to her profile on this website, she did a BA Honours in Business Administration at Kingston University. Now, the website that really sort of put this out yesterday was Liberal Conspiracy website, in an article called "The Reality Behind the Sun's Hatchet Job on Lithuanian Benefit Scrounger." What they noticed, among other things, was they discovered her LinkedIn profile. And the LinkedIn profile shows that, in fact, to say that she is unemployed couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, since she arrived in this country, she was employed as a croupier between 2006 and 2008. Then she was a casino, this is according to her LinkedIn profile here, then she was a casino executive from 2008 to 2009. Then she did her degree, and she did her degree at Kingston University, as I say. And then when she finished her degree, she became a marketing manager from 2011, and according to her LinkedIn profile, she still is one. But as I say, she did want to be a professional actress. So I wrote to the Sun earlier today, or tried to communicate it with the Sun earlier today. Needless to say, we haven't had a response, asking whether the Sun article was actually written by their journalist, or whether it came in as a press release from some PR agency acting on this lady's behalf. They didn't respond. But what is noticed is that actually the journalist who wrote this article, whose name escapes me at the moment, unfortunately, but you can look it up on the Sun, is the same journalist that was alleged to have faked other stories on The Sun, including one called "I Gave My 8-Year-Old Daughter Botox."
Right.
So this journalist claims to have, or seems to have, a history of faking articles. But what was interesting about the LinkedIn profile is that if you follow it up and try to have a look at that LinkedIn profile yourself, this is what you get. So no sooner are bloggers on the internet starting to point out that there's a problem with this story than her LinkedIn profile is taken straight off LinkedIn. So this is, to my mind, clearly a government agenda at work here, and they've been caught with their trousers down.
Yeah, and of course what's going on at the moment is that the government is desperate to stir up violence in this country, because if they can get violence on the streets, then we can bring in the Civil Contingency Act. We can really get the dictatorship to show its face. So the agenda we are predicting is that we're going to see more and more government scams and propaganda, which is designed to get people at each other's throats. The underlying problem, of course, is very simple, that this country cannot simply go on taking more and more people. And of course, what's in the background at the moment is the opening of borders with Bulgaria and Romania. So this is not a question which causes any form of conflict between people at the moment. It doesn't matter what colour you are. This is common sense, that the country at the moment is suffering from infrastructure breaking down, roads, hospitals, schools, defence. It doesn't matter what it is, everything is under pressure, and common sense tells us that we cannot simply go on and on and on, absorbing a new city every year. So we're going to stick on this very closely, because to us the agenda is so simple. The government is going to continue to pull people into this country. The problem is not the people invited. The treachery is going on by our own government, who is simply saying we can take more and more people. And talking of a government full of treachery, we should probably bring up this little story from the Telegraph, which is reporting that Chris Grayling has said that criminals should not be allowed to hire expensive lawyers. And what he's saying is that the government should not be paying out for the most senior QCs to defend suspected criminals, when cheaper junior lawyers could do the job just as well. And he said that there's been £1 billion spent on legal bills, legal aid for criminal cases. Of course, we would just remind viewers and listeners that about £20 billion is being swallowed up by the legal firms in dealing with child stealing. But basically he's saying it's outrageous that a senior QC can earn between £1,300 and £2,000 a day, and we should be using cheaper people. But
Just before we move on,
yeah.
it does use the word suspected criminals.
It does,
so,
yeah.
So where's the presumption of innocence here?
Well, there we are. Well, if we just call that slide back up there.
Sorry.
I was just going to highlight the bit here. This is the key bit. Criminals should not be allowed to hire expensive lawyers. And if we just jump on to the Independent, well, is this a case of criminals using expensive lawyers? Because this is the British government basically using very expensive legal teams in order to try and deny that they've been exporting people for torture. And the gentleman in the picture, well, obviously Mr. Straw, who many people have an opinion on, but the victim in this case, Mr. Belhadj, who was extradited back to Libya, where he was tortured with a lady companion. So where are the criminals? Are they overseas, or are they actually sitting in the warmth of Westminster? Well, UK Column Live believes the criminals and the domestic terrorists are clearly in Westminster itself. Well, there we are, rendition. On rather serious subjects, suicides we've mentioned before. It's extremely interesting that after UK Column has started to highlight anomalies with suicide, so a massive increase in suicides, particularly in small geographic areas, and particularly amongst young people, who then, contrary to the normal flow of statistics, are hanging themselves. Here is an Express article where all of a sudden a number of universities have come out the woodwork to say that the increase in suicide is due to the economic situation. So we've had one analysis by Dr. David Stuckler, a sociologist at Cambridge University, and he's linking a rise in suicides to unemployment and recession. And then they're going on to say that there's been this increase. We've got another social scientist, Dr. Cathy Credy, if I pronounce that properly, at Glasgow-based Medical Research Council. What we find interesting when you look into these reports is that there's absolutely no focus or proper in-depth analysis on the massive increase in suicides amongst young people, and in particular there's no comment on the adverse effects of applied behavioural psychology such as NLP. So we suspect that there's another government propaganda exercise here at the moment to stop people looking at what we believe are some of the major causes of suicides in young people. Coming into this subject from a slightly different angle, this was a report from the Telegraph on the sad death of Oxford-educated Dr. Suzanne Dow, 33. This lady committed suicide after suffering months of abuse from junkie tenants in a house in Beeston in Nottingham. And what's interesting about the article is that when you get through, you see that this lady made repeated attempts to get the local authority to deal with neighbours who were clearly out of control and making her life hell. But in the article is one quote which we think is highly significant, and this is the words, from an email exchange between Nottinghamshire Police, PC Sam Assel, and the housing officer, Alison Marshall, where the police officer wrote of Dr. Suzanne Dow, after hearing she'd written another letter, "You just can't win with some people, can you?" So here we have a classic example where somebody is doing the right thing and making repeated requests for help to the local authority, and they're treated as though they're vexatious, they're a problem, they're a piece of dirt, basically. And this callous attitude we are seeing on the rise amongst the public sector across the country, and certainly we are pointing the finger at the training and the type of training that are being given to public sector employees. So we know there are many, many good people out there. If you're worried about how your colleagues are behaving, we suggest you have a look at the training. Dartmouth is a place just down the road from Plymouth, famous for the Naval College, and another amazing Telegraph article here where it is saying that the BBC has been spending taxpayers' money on setting up an al-Qaeda attack on the Devon resort. This is really quite an extraordinary story. Basically, the stunt was organised for David Dimbleby's forthcoming BBC One series about the history of Britain's efforts to repel invaders. And this is what the thing involved: a simulated attack by al-Qaeda in Dartmouth. And Dimbleby said it was an exercise in what could happen if you are, say, at a base in the Gulf. It was teaching us all about what that would be like. So I'm a bit confused here, because the incident that's been paid for by BBC is in Dartmouth in Devon, but according to Mr. Dimbleby, this is going to help us imagine what it would be like to be in the Gulf. To me, I think it's more BBC propaganda to get us fearful of a supposed worldwide al-Qaeda threat. If we look at a bit more about what he says, the scenes involving Islamic militants caused some alarm in the resort. I think the nearby yachtsmen would have wondered what on earth was going on with all the water shooting everywhere. We didn't use live bullets though. So presumably the BBC will have helped whip up hatred against Muslim tourists and holiday makers who choose to come to the West Country. And they go on to say the programme is about the frontier between Britain and the continent, and that ditch which separates us from the rest of Europe. So they're looking at everything from pirates to wars and more. But of course, it isn't David Dimbleby that's paying for this, it's us, the licence fee payer. Well, here's the gentleman concerned, and if any of you feel angry enough to contact the BBC, and of course Mr. Patton is the man that you should write to personally, please do. It's incredible, isn't it, really, Mike? So whilst Dimbleby is busy talking about al-Qaeda attacks in South Devon, of course we're hearing very little really about the BBC and Jimmy Savile. At the moment, the Telegraph has come out with this story which says that there's going to be a bitter recriminations over transcripts to do with the Pollard review on Jimmy Savile. But most of the comments that we're getting into the column are that it seems smokescreen and mirrors as to what is actually happening.
Well, we saw over the weekend how important the BBC considers the Savile scandal to be, because they had on CBeebies an episode of The Tweenies, which featured a caricature of the man himself. So they're clearly being particularly careful to make sure that no Savile-related material goes out at the moment.
Or not. Meanwhile, of course, a number of viewers have written into us quite excited that the police seem to be taking some action on the VIP list. This, of course, has come out of the exposure in Westminster that a number of senior Tory politicians and others were involved in child abuse. And the inference is that more people, not only at senior levels in the political world, but also in the British establishment, are in fact practicing paedophiles. So the Mirror here has said that a list was seized in a raid on a house, and this is a suburban guest house that was originally operating as a gay brothel. But of course the key point is that we've known a great deal about this location for many, many years, and surprisingly when the police first investigated, and from the story here I think that was back in 1988 when a list was taken at meetings between the manager of the guest house and child protection officials, we haven't seen any full and proper police investigation. Nevertheless, the police are investigating, so we would like to say to police officers who are desperately concerned themselves about the high-level paedophile rings in this country and throughout government, we hope you will do your job and bring these people to justice. NHS, of course, is a major topic at the moment, and there are a number of articles appearing in the paper about closures of accident and emergency facilities at hospitals. This is obviously an article from The Independent, and we just wanted to highlight here that many of these stories don't really get to grips with who the people are that we should be focusing on. So in The Independent's story, Chris Grayling and Ian Duncan Smith are obviously getting a bit squeamish about Cameron's attack on the NHS. So in their local constituencies, they're busy trying to placate people and say that they are standing up for the NHS, when of course this must be a total lie, because we are seeing a collaboration between all three parties to destroy and privatise the NHS. Part of the tactics is scaremongering, of course. So another key headline here, which is saying that hospitals are bad for old people's health. Now, I don't know whether this is supposed to be a joke, but to me it seems an inappropriate topic to be making fun headlines. But if you go through this article, which is particularly unpleasant really, we're saying now that hard-working doctors and nurses are incapable of caring for elderly people in hospitals, and I simply don't believe this. I believe that what is taking place is the destruction of the NHS, and that is being done through the change agenda and senior management. Another article from the Telegraph, just to prove that they're really going for the NHS now, and here's Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, saying that the scandal of the Mid-Staffordshire NHS Trust represented the worst of the problem, but there's bits of Stafford across the NHS. So here we are in Britain in 2013, and inquiries I think, coming to the close now on Staffordshire Hospital, where between 600 and 1,200 patients died unnecessarily, and to date we've simply not seen one official brought to justice, have we? Who's causing the problem? Well, we'd like to get people focused on lists like this that's come out of Wikipedia, so it's pretty easy to have a look at. But these are some of the names of health ministers from 1988. I think Ken Clarke is actually there somewhere up to the present date. So is the problem our hard-working doctors and nurses, or is the problems, or are the problems coming from the incompetence or the political agenda of our own politicians? We think it's the politicians. And we mustn't forget Nick Clegg. He's coming into the spotlight occasionally, but of course, Deputy Prime Minister, hiding in the background, an absolute pro-European, and we can be sure that any attack on British values, traditions and the nation state, Clegg is there at the forefront of it. Mike.
Yeah, okay, so I suppose defence, I suppose, would be the heading for this.
Ministry of War.
Ministry of War,
as a few of our viewers have suggested we should refer to it.
Okay. This is an article highlighting that Obama is close to completing a counter-terrorism manual which aims to establish rules for targeted drone strikes. And we know that the United States has been coming under a lot of criticism recently, not least from us, for killing people in foreign lands using drones. In theory, according to this, this was originally reported by the Washington Post, and in theory, according to this article, the idea of establishing rules in an otherwise unregulated campaign seems great. However, the CIA manual glaringly exempts one hot point: drone strikes in Pakistan. So in other words, they're setting up rules of engagement for drone attacks, but they're leaving out the main area where these drone attacks are occurring, because clearly they don't want to put limitations on what they're entitled to do there.
Well, the other thing that's interesting in that comment is, of course, it's the CIA. So the question is, who is running America's defence? Who is accountable for Americans' defence? Is it effectively the American Ministry of Defence, or is it?
Well, it seems to be the CIA.
CIA
yeah,
Black
yeah,
Ops.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's about the height of it. Yeah. And this article in New York Times, good article, pointing out, as we have done many times, that the jihadist surge in sub-Saharan Africa, in Algeria and these countries, is a direct result of the arms and armaments that have flown into the country around the Gaddafi regime change operation. And the New York Times is pointing out that Gaddafi actually was warning that this is exactly what would happen if there was any attempt to get rid of him. Gaddafi is quoted as saying, "Bin Laden's people would come and impose ransoms by land and sea. We'll go back to the times of Redbeard, of pirates, of Ottomans imposing ransoms on boats." And that's more or less what's happened, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks.
He was murdered, obviously, because he was far too accurate.
That's exactly right.
And so he was in the way.
He was in the way of this problem. So they've gone out of their way to create this problem. We'll come on to that a bit more in a second.
Well, the moment we're looking at Africa and what's happening there at the moment, I think the word hypocrisy must come into our minds. And the Mirror here picked up quite nicely on the fact that David Cameron and George Osborne, of course, are planning a £47 million raid on armed forces pensions. So basically there's going to be an increase in national insurance contributions, and I think the average soldier will be something like £164 a year worse off.
The point to notice on this, though, that isn't mentioned in the Mirror article, is that the raid on pensions already happened. It's already happened, and we've mentioned it many times.
That's true.
The raid on pensions has already happened. They're sticking up national insurance contributions and pushing back the date that we can retire in order to try to hide that fact.
Yeah. Here we've got reference to the foreign hostages being freed in Algeria, but the key point here is the comment from David Cameron. David Cameron says he wants a robust response. What is he after? Well, let's have a look at the young gentleman. Here he is. He's beginning to look a little more haggard. Public school boy, done a bit of work in a bank, and now thinks he's capable of being Prime Minister. But of course, he's only got to do what he's told. But with one hand, he's using the armed forces. With the other hand, he's attacking their pensions. And of course, he's full of bravado because he's not going to appear in the front line. Neither is any of his members of his families. This is what he had to say. David Cameron last night warned that a diplomatic response would not be enough to tackle the growing terrorist threat in North Africa, and that a robust security response must be deployed. Now, I don't know what the problem is with Mr. Cameron, whether he's beginning to lose his memory, but of course, with one hand, he's implementing draconian cuts of the British Armed Forces, and we've recently had reports released talking about the fact that we're getting to the stage where we haven't got sufficient armed forces to respond. With the other hand, Mr. Cameron is making sure that we've got enough violence overseas that he can actually draw British armed forces into those conflict zones. And what is worse is he's going to attack the pay and pensions of the very soldiers he's putting into the front line. Hypocrisy. In fact, there's a picture of him here, and we're going to say well done to the Mirror, because basically this is David Cameron speaking in Westminster, and he's described as the enemy within.
Yeah.
So is it that we now have journalists in the mainstream media actually starting to look in the right place?
Well, it's interesting they call him the enemy within because, of course, the sheer hypocrisy of what he was saying over the weekend. He was saying that this activity, this al-Qaeda activity in the Middle East is going to last for decades. Yeah. And the quote that I think this was the Telegraph again, I can't remember. The quote that he's apparently said is, it's linked to al-Qaeda. It wants to destroy our way of life. It believes in killing as many people as it can. We need to work with others to defeat the terrorists and to close down the ungoverned spaces where they thrive with all means that we have. He must have forgotten that it was his money and his arms that have produced this problem.
Well, I'm going to say, having mentioned his memory, I don't actually think it's his memory. I think this is bunker mentality. David Cameron is now starting to believe his own reality.
Right.
So Hilton, as we said last week, is saying that when he was there with Cameron, both of them would wake up in the morning and hear an announcement and they'd no idea where it came from. I don't think Cameron's in control of the country. The men pulling the purse strings are in control of the country.
Okay.
But of course he's helping defence.
Well, indeed, we're spending lots of money. This was to replace the Harrier, wasn't it? The F-35, the Lightning II. But unfortunately, it seems that it's not, the name Lightning, it seems not to be too appropriate. It's not capable of flying in thunderstorms because there's a major danger that it will blow up in the event that it gets struck by lightning. And in fact, it seems that there's a problem even if it attempts a rapid descent from high altitude to low altitude. So this would seem to be possibly a static electricity related issue with the fuel tank. Apparently the Pentagon's Operational Test and Evaluation Office has stated that test flying within 25 miles of thunderstorms is not permitted, and really this aircraft is simply not fit for purpose.
Well, is this accidental? Personally, I don't think it is. I think this is a deliberate tactic to delay the introduction of a critical part of the defence infrastructure. And what's really going on is that the whole time we don't have this aircraft available, we're losing expertise in flying these aircraft. And when our super carrier finally arrives online, we, the British, will not have the capability. And my personal prediction is that we will then start to see an even further integration with French seaborne aviation. So I believe that this is a delaying tactic to ensure that there's a greater pushing together of British and French defence forces. And I think the same thing is actually happening at the moment in Algeria and Mali. This is what it's about, getting the French and the British to operate together, because we're going to disappear as a nation state.
Yeah.
Is there any good news today? Not a lot. I
Not
don't think.
really, no. Right, so we know that there's controversy over HS2. Apparently the controversy is getting to the point that the government is feeling so like it has to justify the whole project using any means possible, and now it's saying that HS2 will bring fast broadband to rural areas. So, brilliant. We're going to get fast broadband as they drive this fast train through the children's. I mean, it has to be said that the whole HS2 project, in my opinion, is basically anti-infrastructure. It's been designed to enrage again. In this case, they've chosen a route which is going to enrage
the maximum
number of wealthy people in particular that can afford to push an anti-infrastructure campaign. So,
just so I've got this right, but the good news is we get broadband.
But this is what they're basically trying to do. They're trying to. It's maybe some cynical attempt to try to buy off these people by saying, look, we know you've got rubbish internet connectivity at the moment, so you'll get fast broadband when this new railway line gets built through. It's brilliant. But I just wanted to remind people of this article on the column, because we should be investing in infrastructure. Have a read at that article, because I just wanted to give a slightly more positive view of what infrastructure development might mean for the country.
And I think what we're really saying is that when we get government off our backs and people start to use their brains and experience and knowledge in a creative way, we're capable of actually producing good things.
Yes.
To serve the public.
Exactly.
So well done, the Japanese, then. Well, this man's being a bit outspoken at the moment.
Well, Bill Gates is heading over to Britain at the end of the month to give the BBC's Dimbleby Lecture. So
Dimbleby's going from al-Qaeda to Bill Gates.
Well, indeed. But as we know, in 2010, Bill Gates inspired a bit of controversy over his comments on vaccines at a TED lecture that he gave in London. The lecture was mainly about global warming. Now, before we go any further, we'll just show a quick excerpt from that TED lecture.
We need to meet a new constraint, and that constraint has to do with CO2. CO2 is warming the planet. Until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. And somehow we have to make changes that will bring that down to zero. It's been constantly going up. It's only various economic changes that have even flattened it at all. So we have to go from rapidly rising to falling and falling all the way to zero. This equation has four factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero, and that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Okay, so I mean, obviously the lecture was mainly about the effects of global warming, about how to reduce carbon dioxide. It was based on the premise that CO2 causes man-made global warming. But it was the comment about vaccines that caused most of the controversy. And so, the question was, what did he mean at the time? Was he really suggesting that vaccines would be used to deliver as a delivery mechanism for population reduction? And the question is, would they really do that? And if you watch the rest of the lecture was mainly about energy and other things. Yep. It was actually quite a good lecture, except for the fact that it was based on the idea that CO2 was the cause of the problem, yeah. and that was so anyway. Shortly after that furore over those comments, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation issued a statement, and they were suggesting that less infant mortality as a result of global vaccination would result in less children and therefore a decline in the population. And in a subsequent video with CNN, Gates stated that the benefits are in terms of reducing sickness, reducing population growth. It really allows a society to take care of itself once you've made that intervention. So, you know, but at the same time, infant mortality on its own, so that solving that problem is a good thing, but solving that problem on its own doesn't have any effect on population growth, because people in poor economic areas still need large families in order to be a viable family unit.
To work the land, etc.
Work the land, and it's a subsistence economy, and they've got to look after their elderly, so they still need large families. So his argument doesn't stack up that way. And again, you come back to the question, would the vaccines be used perhaps to deliver some other issue, like, for example, could vaccines be used to sterilise? And in fact, there is historical precedent for this. This one is from 1996. Former population control official confirms Philippine vaccine scandal, and this was Filipino women injected with sterilising agents inside a vaccine. This was for tetanus. And it was in 9 out of 47 vials of the vaccine. And so 22 of the vaccines were fine, but 9 of the 47 were not so fine. And you could argue that you need a control group for any scientific test. So perhaps the 9 were the scientific test and the rest were the control group. So
yes, but it was done without the consent of the women.
That was done without the consent of the women. And then following that, in 2004, we have UNICEF providing polio vaccine contaminated with sterilising agents. And then following that, in 2007, we find that, in fact, not only was the polio vaccine not doing its job, but it was actually providing an unusual outbreak of polio, so it was actually contributing to the polio situation. And of course, we've got the whole controversy over whether polio vaccines were used to distribute the AIDS virus in the first place, and you know, I'm not going to comment too much on that, other than to say that controversy still rolls on. But you know, it's okay, because Bill Gates, according to the Telegraph, is on a mission from God. So that makes everything all right. So this was the Telegraph's article today, pointing out that Gates is going to be giving this lecture at the end of the month, but one of the points that he makes in this article in the Telegraph is that he believes that the best thing that he can do with his money is to aim to eradicate polio right around the world. And I'm fascinated that he's chosen polio, particularly if you watch the TED video that we showed a clip from at the very beginning. He makes it clear that the greatest challenge to humanity is reducing CO2 to zero while maintaining a standard of living for people. So in one lecture he's saying CO2 is the biggest problem, the biggest challenge for mankind, but today he feels that distributing polio vaccines is the best way to proceed. And I just think that I don't believe for one second that he didn't mean anything other than vaccines would be used for a population reduction program. And this is something that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, population control, is something they've been advocating for a long time.
Well, I don't have any problem at all in looking at the evidence that's out there and coming to the conclusion that vaccines are being used to deliberately damage our health.
Yeah.
And in this case, for population control. What is scary about this is that Bill Gates, who is he? What is his expertise on vaccines? Well, what is it? I don't know.
He doesn't have any.
And he says he has no use for money. This is God's work. Well, presumably he's got no use for money because he's got so much he doesn't really need it anymore.
That's it.
Hypocrisy. And we better just end on fashion, because Bill Gates obviously at one end of the scale. But young Pippa Middleton has been hitting the press over the weekend in particular with the fact that she's now sort of tied up with the brand Modula in London. Flagship handbags, Pippa grab bags, bug out bags maybe it's a bug out bag. But the key point is that while this young lady is swanning around the capital with a bag which is very cheap at 150, 160, 180 pounds, The people who are making them in India are being paid 17 pence an hour. Something's very wrong, isn't it?
So I mean that says it all, doesn't it? Because you want to reduce the population, you improve people's standard of living. You know, if my grandmother, as she was one of 15 children, 2 generations later, you know, we're having families of 2 children. That's how you deal with the problem. You let these countries develop and develop their economies, give them a standard of living, and the families will naturally become smaller.
Common sense. Let them determine their own future.
Indeed.
Okay, well, on that note of handbags, we'll end the programme today. Our view is overwhelmingly that Britain is being attacked by its own government, and if we're to stop what's happening in this country, we really have got to deal with the criminals who do appear to be in Westminster. And we're going to keep a close eye on the report of paedophiles in high places. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Bye.